everybody. Hello. Good afternoon, and you're very welcome. Really lovely to see you all for what I think should be a really interesting session. The first half will be looking at the history of Trinity Hall, and in the second conversation, at the future of Trinity Hall. So great to see you all. And also I want to welcome those who are joining us online. You're very welcome too. And whenever we come to moments this afternoon where we take questions, we'll be able to do that both in the room with a microphone, but also online. So for the next while, we're going to hear from three fabulous speakers who will take us back into the many centuries of Trinity Hall's history, its 675th history. We'll be hearing first about the early days, secondly about the middle period, and then third about, as they say, I know. And guess what? The third speaker's going to address the 20th century. And our speakers, I will introduce our speakers now because they will then take it in turns to talk to you each for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the end. And our first speaker will be Alexandra Browne, who's the college archivist and records manager. She's been with Trinity Hall for 2 years. Hailing originally from California, she came into the UK in 2010 to do an Emeritus in medieval studies at St Andrews. And before coming to Trinity Hall, she did an MSc in information management and preservation at Glasgow and worked in the Hertfordshire archives and local studies. We'll then be hearing from Drs Justin Davies, who graduated from Pembroke. We won't hold that against you, with a degree in history. After Sandhurst and then serving as an officer in the Grenadier Guards, he worked for the Foreign Office in war zones attached to international organisations engaged in crisis management and post-conflict in reconstruction. In 2016, in I think what we could say was a change in career direction, Justin, he co-founded the groundbreaking Jordens van Dyck panel paintings project in Belgium and is a specialist on Anthony van Dyck. He's published widely in art historical journals. He's currently a visiting fellow of the Rubenianum Rubenshuis in Antwerp, an AHRC IAA Knowledge Exchange Fellow in the History of Art Department in Cambridge. And then thirdly, we'll be hearing from Dr. Sandra Raban, a historian of medieval England by discipline, but as I say, speaking to us about more recent times. Sandra was one of the two first women to be admitted to the college. Their portrait hangs in the hall. I'm sure many of you will have seen it. And it was a gift of the Trinity Hall Association, for which many, many thanks. Sandra served variously as Director of Studies in History, Archivist, Admissions Tutor, and finally Senior Tutor. She taught for many years also at Homerton College and was an active member of the Cambridge Examinations Syndicate. Until recently, following retirement, she spent half the year in southwest France, based back now entirely in Cambridge, and she's a patron of our 1350 Society. So please, let's welcome our panel. We'll be hearing first from Alex.
There we go. First, I should say I've actually been here for 10 years. Sorry. So before I dive into what Trinity Hall was like in the Middle Ages, I'm going to back up a bit and talk about why the colleges were founded in the first place. College comes from the Latin word collegium, which means community or corporation, essentially a collection of people. The first college in Cambridge, Peterhouse, was formed nearly 80 years after the founding of the university. So where did everyone live before then? Sorry, I can't resist a Monty Python reference. So for the friars and monks, as you saw, they lived in the lodgings of their order, but for everyone else, they had to find their own lodgings, ideally cheap and communal lodgings. So this prompted the establishment of hostels, where the scholars would band together and lease a house, and they'd elect amongst themselves a principal, who would be responsible for maintaining discipline in the house, collecting rents and paying the rent to the landlord. By 1231, the university was empowered to put in rent controls because a stable supply of affordable housing was crucial to the university's survival. Although some hostels grew to be quite large, including their own halls, chapels, and libraries, they lacked permanence. Unlike the colleges, they didn't have charters, statutes, or endowments. All the residents had to pay their own room and board. They tended to be younger, were under less discipline, and could be quite rowdy. Even after the colleges were founded, the vast majority of students were still living in the hostels because the colleges only offered accommodation to a select few. The hostels began to disappear by the late 15th century as the colleges began accepting more pensioners, which is students who paid their own room and board, and they began purchasing the hostels. So what prompted the founders to establish colleges? Well, sometimes a founder would have a special interest, such as Bishop Bateman's desire to advance the study of both canon and civil law. However, one of the main attractions of founding a college was to have a community of people who are obliged to pray for your soul to lessen your time in purgatory. So that's fun. So in exchange for their prayers, their room, board, and expenses were paid through the endowment of the college. All in all, I'd say that was a pretty good deal. So moving on to Trinity Hall in the Middle Ages. Very few of Trinity Hall's medieval records have survived. The first 200 or so years are a bit of a mystery. The only surviving document that gives us an indication of what life might have been like at Trinity Hall in the Middle Ages are the foundation statutes, which you can see up there. However, the problem with relying on statutes for information is that they represent the founder's ideal rather than the reality. Bishop Bateman's vision for his new college was ambitious. He planned to create a college for a master and 20 fellows who were supposed to be split between both canon and civil law. Trinity Hall, like many other medieval colleges, did not maintain nearly as many fellows as the statute stipulated due to lack of funds. When Bishop Bateman died suddenly in 1355, he left the college with only a master, 3 fellows, and 2 scholars. 7 fellowships were funded through bequests in the 16th century, but only 1 fellowship was created between then and 1931. So Bishop Bateman's vision wasn't realized until 1952, 602 years later. Undergraduates typically would have been 15 when they started, and sometimes even as young as 12. They would have been primarily the sons of prosperous peasants, yeomen, and merchants. The university was one of the key agents of social mobility in the Middle Ages. It was not common for the sons of noblemen to study at the university in this period. However, it did become much more common in the 16th century onwards. Fortunately for Trinity Hall, law was considered one of the higher faculties and could only be studied at the graduate level, which means the youngest members of Trinity Hall probably would have been in their 20s. At Trinity Hall, preference was given to scholars from eastern counties, and the vast majority of fellows here before 1500 were from Norwich. Those supported by the college's foundation were well looked after. They received an annual stipend of about £5, give or take a few pounds, which is about 5,000 today, and additional sums at certain feast days to pay for their necessities. The college also provided the commons or meals, as well as providing a communal collection of clothing, fur, and other necessities to ensure that the impoverished or infirm members might not be burdened with unnecessary expenses. Members were required to wear long robes or short tabards with capes, depending on the season, which must be worn in processions or other public events. In the Middle Ages, students didn't come to study at the university, they came to study with a particular master. So if the master agreed to take them on, then the master put the student's name on the matricula or class list, which made them a legal undergraduate. The masters were not paid by the university, but by the students directly. And before the 15th century, the fees were unregulated and set by a bargaining process. And the cost of formal ceremonies involved to take a degree were substantial and deterred many students from finishing the degrees. However, provisions were made in the statutes of Trinity Hall to subsidize part of the expense of inception into canon law. The governance of the college hasn't really changed that much. The fellows shared administrative duties, and they agreed major decisions by committee. They also had statutory rights to elect and remove the master or other fellows of the college. Much emphasis was placed on discipline and the expected conduct of its members, because their There's great concern at this time of admitting people who might introduce dissension into the community. If any member, including the master, was found to be dishonest, quarrelsome, disobedient, or negligent in their duties or studies, they were to be corrected, punished, and possibly expelled. The statutes only list 5 members of staff to look after the community: a steward, a baker who could both brew and cook, and 3 other assistants in the kitchen and bakery. The most junior members served food during the meals, and all members were responsible for their own housekeeping responsibilities or duties. However, if they had the means, they could hire private servants, and the servants were expected to be peaceful, chaste, humble, and quiet. The medieval scholar's life was governed by the canonical clock. All members of Trinity Hall had to be at least in minor holy orders, but only the canonist needed to proceed all the way to the priesthood. They were expected to say the prescribed prayers at the designated times, only speak in Latin, attend Mass every day, and listen to daily scripture readings, including at mealtimes. They would have woken up at dawn, or lauds, said their prayers, and began their lectures or disputations at 6 a.m. prime, and their day would have ended shortly after sunset, compline. They would have usually had their main meal at 10 a.m. and a lighter meal at 5 p.m. Meals would have mostly consisted of bread, meat, beer or wine, fish on fast days, and some vegetables and fruit. Instruction took the form of ordinary lectures, which were led by the fellows on central texts of the curriculum, so that there's an example of an ordinary lecture. Cursory lectures, which were readings on the text with some basic commentary, and those could have been led by bachelor's or master's students. Extraordinary lectures, which were given outside the canonical hours and on texts not central to the syllabus. And disputations, where the students would be given a question or a problem to debate amongst themselves. Members of Trinity Hall were required to dispute on some point of civil or canon law at least 3 times a week. They were not allowed to be absent from the disputations without a reasonable cause, leave college without permission, or engage in any outside employment that might distract them from their studies. So now that we've covered what life was like for a medieval scholar, let's talk about Trinity Hall itself. What was actually here? Official permission to start acquiring land and houses was granted by the king in February 1350, but the first piece of property wasn't purchased until November 1350. Bishop Bateman paid £300, which is about 300,000 today, for land and a house which formerly housed the monks of Ely. So yeah, that's that left side. And then the monk's house also included a well, which was used until the mid-19th century. So they were drinking water, not just beer. It's possible they were already in possession of John Goldcorn's house, which is, I guess, the south side of Front Court, which is where the hall is now today. 4 years later, a house and land was purchased from John Drax, which completed the acquisition of land that would make up Front Court. So that's the land on the north side. The college continued to acquire small parcels of land and reached the present size, except for one small piece of land, by 1544. Work began on the kitchens and north and east ranges of the quadrangle in 1374. By this point, Goldcorn's house had been transformed into the dining hall, and they're most likely living in the old monk's house. Once it was finished, the quadrangle was larger than any of its predecessors. Permission to build a chapel was granted in 1352, but it's unclear when it was actually constructed, possibly in 1374. It wasn't consecrated until 1513, so members would have attended Mass at the local church, St. John Zachary. This church was demolished in the 1440s when they built King's College Chapel, and then Trinity Hall was granted the use of St. Edward's Church. Like the chapel, the college's first library was probably built in 1374. It's thought to have been located over what is now the passage between Avery Court and Front Court. The books would have been few in number and initially kept in the college chest. Bateman Bishop Bateman donated some books to the college, which are listed in the statutes. And he wished for all the books to be chained because books were extremely expensive at the time. They're all handwritten. Only fellows beyond the first degree were allowed to borrow the books, and books could only be removed from college for going to lectures. Colleges were designed like monasteries, rooms around a cloister and refectory-style communal dining. The buildings were 2 stories high and grouped in staircases, like they are today. The bedrooms were communal as well, 2 to 3 people sharing a room. Normally it was a more senior member housed with more junior members so they could keep an eye on the junior members. And the master lived amongst the fellows as well. Masters' lodges weren't constructed until after the Reformation, when it became more common for masters to marry. The rooms were very basic, usually only containing beds, a few shelves, a wash bin, and a separate, more private area with desks and stools for study. The scholars' chambers would have been extremely cold because they generally didn't have their own fireplaces, and the windows were unglazed. Yeah. After dinner, scholars could stay in the hall and socialize and gather around the fire to keep warm. But even with the fire in the hall would have been still quite cold because the fire was located in the middle of the room and there's a hole in the middle of the ceiling to let out the smoke. And there were no screen doors until 1596. So the need for warm communal space for scholars to gather prompted the establishment of common rooms because they were smaller and easier to heat. And there we go. That's Trinity Hall in the Middle Ages in a nutshell.
Good afternoon. Having been travelling quite a lot over the last few days, it is now 3:45 p.m. on a Saturday. I'm in black tie. I must be in Cambridge. Though from the looks that I was getting from the thousands of tourists on Trinity Street this afternoon, I felt as though I was a croupier coming off my shift at a shady casino. It feels even stranger to be here wearing a white dinner jacket after the autumn equinox, but there is a reason for this, and that is that when the great Rebecca from our Alumni and Development Office asked me to speak to you about Trinity Hall in the early modern period, she advised me that the curtain behind me would be dark blue, and that if I was to wear a black dinner jacket or a dark suit, I would fade into oblivion, especially as it is being live streamed. Looking around the lecture theatre, I am delighted to see that I am in the majority of one. And I suppose, though, I should be grateful that none of you stopped me on front court and asked that I fetch you a gin and tonic. In this short presentation, I'm going to follow on from Alex and start in 1500 and take us through to 1750, by which time the medieval buildings were significantly altered to those that we know now. It will cover the major events of the early modern period that impacted the college, mention some of the major personalities, and touch on those regulations and quirks of college life for students, some of which we retain today, and others which have thankfully fallen by the wayside. As all the arts and humanities graduates here will hopefully agree, context is everything. And we should situate Trinity Hall in 1500 in the context of a much smaller Cambridge than it is today. There were 11 colleges in 1500, which are still extant today. Most of them in 1500 were still known as halls, and of which we were, as we all know, 5th in foundation. By 1550, 3 further colleges had been founded, Christ's and the behemoths, St. John's and Trinity, the latter founded by the behemoth himself, Henry VIII, through the merger of King's Hall and Michael House. So in 1574, Cambridge would look like this, if I could move to the next slide. But I appear to have frozen the screen. As you can tell, I'm an art historian rather than a scientist. Oh, no, we're there. Excellent. So in 1574, Cambridge looked like this, as depicted in the first representation of the town and its colleges in the engraving Oppidum Cantabrigii by Richard Lyne. In terms of numbers, in 1574, there were 1,783 students at the University of Cambridge. 68 of these were at Trinity Hall. Trinity Hall's central site footprint was much the same in the early modern period as it is now, as can be seen in this detail from John Hammond's 1592 engraving of Cambridge. The only representation of the college's medieval buildings before the significant Baroque alterations begun by Nathaniel Lloyd in the first half of the 18th century is David Logan's depiction of Trinity Hall circa 1688, published in Cantabrigii Illustrata in 1690. The first thing that you will probably notice is that the main entrance and the porter's lodge were not where they are now, but were to be found leading into what is now Wong Avery Court. The present entrance and porter's lodge was created in the early 18th century and the old entrance demolished in 1864. But the original gates were saved, and they are now the gates that can be found in the gateway to Garrett Hostel Lane. Beyond the north side of Front Court, if you go beyond where the hall and the cafeteria are now, you can make out some crenellations on the engraving. These were the top of a wall and a passageway that led from the master's lodge to the old library. The door at the end of this passageway is still faintly visible in the brickwork. The door that is still there now was the door at the top of the external staircase that led to the library. The old library itself is not medieval, but was built in the 16th century, probably in the last decade. What is now the Fellows' Garden was the master's own garden, and the Fellows' Garden was what is now Latham Lawn, and also covered where the Victorian buildings now stand. North Court and all the ground adjacent to Garrett Hostel's Lane was the Fellows' Fruit Garden. There was a 48-foot high yew tree with a seat around it in Front Court, which was known then as Great Court. The tree had been planted in memory of a fellow and was cut down in 1739, it having died. The major events of the early modern period in England were the Reformation, the dissolution of the Catholic monasteries between 1536 and 1541, the English Civil War, and the subsequent restoration in 1660. Despite its Catholic foundation, Trinity Hall and the other colleges of Oxford and Cambridge, also the colleges of Eton and Winchester, were exempted from the 1546 Act of Parliament, which suppressed all other colleges, chantries, and free chapels, with their revenues being granted to the king. During this ominous time, however, it became clear that colleges, like monasteries, were often living beyond their means. A commission was appointed in 1548 for the visitation of Cambridge and Eton. It resulted in the most serious threat to Trinity Hall's existence encountered in her history to date. The commission revised the statutes of the university and some colleges. Most disturbingly, they proposed the amalgamation of Trinity Hall and Clare Hall, which latter college they described as much decayed. in order to form a new institution, Edward's College of Civil Law, named after the 13-year-old King Edward VI. So we were nearly 450 years ahead of Murray Edwards. The master, Stephen Gardiner, elected in 1525 while still under the age of 30, one of the titans of Tudor diplomacy and domestic policy as Secretary of State and Lord Chancellor, pictured here by the Flemish painter Quentin Matsys, was in prison in the Tower of London at the time. He protested vigorously against the proposed amalgamation. Thankfully, the plan fell through amidst the commotions and confusions of 1549, prompted by the rebellions in opposition to the establishment of the Book of Common Prayer. Trinity Hall survived these turbulent times. One fellow was not so fortunate. Thomas Bilney was burnt at the stake in Norwich in 1531 for heresy, condemned to death by the Bishop of Norwich, Richard Nyker, who was himself a Trinity Hall man. Trinity Hall in Cambridge also weathered the vicissitudes of the English Civil War, relatively unscathed, certainly compared to Oxford. The master during this period was Thomas Eden, a name well known to the Eden scholars amongst you. He was also a Member of Parliament for Cambridge from 1640 to 1645. And very strangely, no portraits exist of Thomas Eden. In July 1642, Parliament issued orders that the county of Cambridge was to arm itself. According to the college accounts, the fellows, in the absence of the master at Westminster, who surely would not have approved, paid out £10, 15 shillings and 8p for 6 muskets, bandoliers and ammunition for the college. Thankfully, Oliver Cromwell visited Trinity Hall and seized the muskets before any harm could ensue. It was just as well, as noted by Henry Malden in his History of the College published in 1902, the university authorities had complained that the townsmen were practicing with their unaccustomed arms at the windows of scholars. And though this proceeding required to be stopped, it was as well that the scholars should not have the opportunity of practicing back. Not only did Trinity Hall survive, and survive well, during the early modern period, but so did her silver. We still retain the Founder's Cup and other silver pieces mentioned in an inventory of 1557. The greatest threat, in fact, to the silver at Trinity Hall, as in other colleges, came from the fellows themselves. As William Warren, a fellow, noted in the 18th century, the plate at Trinity Hall, as elsewhere, was treated with something more than freedom, and college officers seem to have sold it or to have had it converted at their discretion. If, as Cole the antiquary says, with special reference to a piece of plate at King's College, it had the fortune to escape the fiery trial of fanaticism, but it was not always safe from the brutality of the college bursar. That's the college bursar at King's, Tim, not here. But what of the lives of the students during the early modern period? In truth, their college lives changed little between 1500 and 1750. Towards the end of this period, in 1728, there were 70 students, nearly the same as the 68 in 1574. The college was composed of one master, Sir Nathaniel Lloyd, who was master for 25 years, from 1710 to 1735, 12 fellows, 14 scholars, and 55 described as students of all sorts. There was also a curious breed which persists to this day, known as fellow commoners. Compared to other colleges, we were larger than Corpus Christi, St Catherine's, Magdalen and Sidney Sussex, and we were 3 and 6 students smaller than Peterhouse and Pembroke, respectively. The college was extremely collegial. Chapel was compulsory, on a daily basis, and there were fines for being late to chapel. As recorded by Malden, men, of course, did not always come to chapel. It was ordered in 1725 that as pecuniary mulcts proved ineffectual, a scholar absent more than 3 times a week shall, for the first such an offence in a quarter, perform an exercise, for the second a copy of verses, for the third a declamation to be recited from memory in the college hall, and given in to the master and fellows written out. These compositions were to be preserved, and too many from one man might delay his degree. Coming in twice after the Psalms counted as one absence. Furthermore, the college's order book recorded that every student was forbidden from entering the fellows' garden or crossing the grass in front court, and were not to leave their rooms without being dressed in gown, mortarboard, and bands, and to remove their mortarboards in the presence or when they sighted fellows. It was strictly forbidden for a student to, quote, come to chapel in his nightgown, slippers, shoes unbuckled, or his stockings untied, or behave indecently at the scholars' table in hall. The fine was 2d for each offence, and any offence in hall was paid in 2d worth of beer to the other scholars. The combination room and the hall were the collegial centres of college. As Alex has said, students, unless those who were very wealthy, slept in small communal dormitories, and as heating fuel and candles were expensive, spent their time together in the combination room. Hall was heated by charcoal burnt in the middle of the floor, as Alex said, and the smoke exited through a cupola in the ceiling, which is why a cupola was retained during the extensive Georgian reworking of the medieval buildings, which commenced under Nathaniel Lloyd's mastership. And Nathaniel Lloyd will be well known to you all from his portrait in Hall, which he placed in the wall in perpetuity and cannot be removed. He gave £3,000 to the college for the purpose of the rebuilding. Hall and chapel were rebuilt completely, and Baroque facades were imposed on front court. Only the old library and the wall of front court backing onto North Court retained their original identity. These works have left us with those parts of the college that we know today. And on that note, we must leave a happy Trinity Hall in 1750, pass over the period in the remainder of the 18th and in the 19th centuries that a college historian once described as unadventurous stability. Good for the college, no doubt, but not to a presenter. And I must pass on to Sandra, who will take us straight into the exciting progress that was made in the 20th century. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. What I really want to talk about is not the whole 20th century, but the second half of the 20th century and the actual transformation of the college. At the beginning of the 20th century, Thomas Eden would have recognised Trinity Hall. By 2000, I doubt it. The watershed was World War II, without a doubt. Some years ago, we did some oral history with the staff, and their recollections make this very plain. Incidentally, Mr. Sloots, whom some of you may remember as our kitchen manager and wonderful cook, was Montgomery's food taster during the war. But he came back after his military service and led us very happily into the future. I'm not going to say anything very much about finance because Trinity Hall had its ups and downs, certainly. All the operating accounts were in deficit when I became a fellow in 1976 due to the oil crisis. But generally speaking, thereafter, partly because we had a string of very good bursars, partly because we got more professional advice, the college became very much basically richer. But it will have its ups and downs again, as we shall hear shortly. That professional advice was very much a hallmark of the second half of the 20th century. The college became more professional in every sense. I mean, a lot of this was what was going on in society at large, nothing specifically to do with us, but some of it was to do with us. And we were very fortunate, I think, in those who were our leaders during those years. I will just mention, perhaps briefly, that part of that professionalism was the creation, if you like, of the Development Office. The widespread adoption of information technology, which has transformed all our lives and nothing very much to do with Trinity Hall specifically. We've had more staff, we've had more complicated legislation. I'm awfully glad I'm not senior tutor today, put it that way. But the other thing that's transformed in the course of those years was the architecture of the college. You may or may not know that there was a project to build right down the wall between the Fellows' Garden and the court, and have a subterranean master's lodge. Now that went quite a long way before Professor Khan, I believe, stood up in the governing body and said, we shall not do this. And there were resignations, and it was all very exciting. But anyway, I think we were quite fortunate not to have done that. But there have been other very interesting physical transformations of the college. You've only got to look at the library, all of this, for example, the Wong Avery music room, not to mention what's gone on the other sites at Wychfield and down in Thompson's Lane. So it's been a great period of building, as it has in many parts of Cambridge. What's perhaps more characteristic of us particularly is the arts, both visual arts and music. We were very unconfident of our ability to identify anybody to commission to do anything when I first became a fellow. I think the stained glass in the college chapel to celebrate the Archbishop of Canterbury when Robert Runcie became Archbishop, that was about as far as we dared go. These days we're much more confident. We've got our tapestry, we've got the portraits, we've got a proper organ. We're musically very active, and in all of those things has been partly down to benefaction, mainly from old members, but also masters, one after another, have endeavoured to raise our intellectual tone, with quite good success, I have to say. What I remember, of course, most was the change, the social change. Now, this began with the Butler Education Act, public funding for students. People like me could come with a full grant if necessary, which, of course, is no longer the case. The abolition of the entrance exam made a difference. It meant that people from ordinary backgrounds could have a punt without really having to go to a lot of trouble. And that meant we had a wider range of undergraduates than we had before. And then, in the immortal words of our late Chancellor, Prince Philip, and then there were the women. Now, I'm not going to say much about that because we're coming up to the 50th anniversary, and I'm sure there'll be a great deal to be said on the subject then. But also something else which was very important was the expansion of the MCR. There were very few postgraduate students when I first arrived, and now they play an important part of the college, both numerically and socially. They got a pretty raw deal when I was first here, I have to say, and that has also changed, I hope they feel. So the college has become more socially varied, more international, and as a result of all this, it's become, I think, more distinguished over a broader spectrum. I mean, if you look at our list of honorary fellows in the 1970s and 80s, they were overwhelmingly High Court judges. There's nothing wrong with High Court judges. In fact, we had 10 at one point. But now look at what they are. We've got a film star, we've got an Olympian, we've got countless people, a potter, lots of literary people. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And that, I think, is really a result of it being more difficult to get a place at Trinity Hall than it used to be. When I was first a fellow, I used to come to reunions, and these nice old chaps would say to me, I know I wouldn't get in now, but I really, really did enjoy it and appreciated the opportunity. And this was all very well until about 2000. I suddenly thought, I wouldn't get in now. And I think the standard has become, I mean, at one level, alarmingly high. But at another, it's become a very rich society in which to live. So, where does that leave us? Well, it's not just the rich and famous, I think, that I would like to mention. I mean, part of the diversity and part of the strength of Trinity Hall has been that we have always had people who did interesting things which didn't necessarily earn money, but which were socially extremely useful. I think at the moment of one of our old students who lives in Washington, who was so incensed by the Supreme Court granting immunity to Donald Trump before he became president, that she's been standing on the steps of the Supreme Court with a placard saying, "No one is above the law." Now, that is actually a rather a Trinity Hall thing to do, and very laudable. She was also a volunteer for the Moderna COVID vaccine. So, you know, none of those things make money, but they are valuable to the community. Another of the historians is a poet and lives by her poetry. Not I have to say, very lavishly, but nevertheless, we are a very broad community, and I have to say that I'm very proud of that diversity, and I'm very proud of that decency. I mean, the sheer decency of Trinity Hall, which is something that, you know, you can't sort of create out of nothing. It's just happened. So I think that's really probably all I want to say, except that we've always been very collegiate. And things like the Trinity Hall Association and the Aula Club, they antedate all the more sort of formal fundraising that we've gone into recently. So long may it continue, but I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. Thank you.
Could I welcome our speakers up onto the stage now? Sandra, do you want to come around this way? Thank you. Lovely. Gosh, well, thank you all so much. You know, I have, as a dutiful master in the past few years, read my way through various history volumes and explored the archives, but actually I learnt and heard things from each of you that I wasn't aware of, and I think it gave us a really good span, both of the formal history, but a lot actually about the spirit and the character, especially Sandra. Thank you very much for really reminding us that in the end that's what matters, the people and the community. So does anybody have any questions in the room, and then we'll see if there's anything online. Yes, please. Oh, sorry, yes, I should say we have a microphone, so
I'd
we'll
like
bring
to
that.
know what the relationship of Archbishop Laud was to the college. I mean, there's a portrait of him in the hall, but I don't think he was a fellow, was he?
No.
No, not at all. It's the portrait, it hangs over the door. If you look to the portrait of Nathaniel Lloyd this evening, it's hanging high up on the right. And it's a partial copy of the portrait of Archbishop Laud by Anthony van Dyck that is currently in the Fitzwilliam Museum. And the intriguing thing is that not only does he not appear to have any connection to Trinity Hall whatsoever, but he was actually diametrically opposed to Thomas Eden in many ways. So I thank you very much for pointing it out. I feel I should probably do a bit of research on it as a Van Dyck specialist. Thank you very much for the task.
Alex, anything to add? Or
No, I don't.
Yes, thank you. And a question there, please. Oh,
It's perhaps a silly question, but I remember when I came up to Cambridge, somebody told me that you could walk on Trinity Hall land from Cambridge to London. Was that true?
I've heard that about Trinity College.
I think it's one for the
That's
Bursar.
No, Trinity Hall. Somebody told me that it was Trinity, was it?
No.
It's not Trinity either. But I'm afraid
I mean, there might have been a time you could have hopped a few fields and farms towards Norwich, but I'm not sure we've really.
Is Trinity Hall monument that were put there by William Warren, who Justin mentioned, and he used an old restricted fund, the Causeway Fund, to erect the rather beautiful milestone, which you see, which I think there's one on Trumpington Road, first one by Brooklands Avenue, and they all the way out to so there's certainly one in Almere, I believe, and that go down the road to choice shall we can. So yeah, we have the representation. Awesome.
Rochelle, do we have any? No, that's fine. Yes, please.
How have attitudes towards sport changed over the years, in particular more modern times, in terms of college giving encouragement to undergraduates to participate in sport?
I think, first of all, we should say, would anybody in the medieval years have done any sport whatsoever?
No.
Right. So I think that's a good question when sort of college sports got going, or because certainly in the archives there are.
Yes, I'd say it definitely seems like the 19th century. So like, I think the boat club is probably like 1827. That's, as far as I know, the oldest sporting club that we have. And it seems like that's the time when clubs start coming about. So I guess you see there are the paintings of people, I think even medieval people, ice skating on the Cam when it froze over. So they did kind of unofficial spots. But yeah, nothing really organized until the 19th century.
Yes, and into the 20th century, yes. So coming to more recent years, we've got the senior tutor here. Michael, do you want to comment on that?
I could say a little bit about that. So, one of the things that we are looking at right now very closely, we have a project investigating the link between well-being and academic success. And there's very good evidence to show that, people who are well-rounded, who are resting, who are exercising, actually do better in their exams. So we do promote sports, but not to the exclusion of your academic studies. So I think it's good for everybody to get out and exercise and make friends. It's very social activity, but we have to keep our focus, of course, on academic things. So it's encouraged by the senior tutor up to a certain level.
From the undergraduates, the encouragement, how would that water? Has there been increasing interest?
Yeah, I mean, we have dozens of sports clubs at all different levels. We have many of our students who are participating in, the blues level, university representation, down to just, sort of five-a-side, give it a go on a Saturday afternoon. Mary attends some of the fixtures, I think, as well. So it's very popular.
Yeah. And, we've mentioned the boat club. I mean, the boat club is coming up to its 200th anniversary in a couple of years and is really thriving. And the thing that impresses me about the boat club is it's a spirit that, is ambitious. And for those who really want to are, rowing at the highest level. Our women are within touching distance of Head of the River last summer. Absolutely amazing in the bumps. But at the same time, it's a very kind of welcoming and inclusive club. And lots of people, as Michael says, kind of give it a go and do their best. The soccer team is on better form than it's been for some decades. Again, was reached the Cuppers final this year, which I don't think it had done since the very early 21st century. So there's lots going on. And as Michael says, I mean, unbelievably, we have, miraculously, there are people who seem to be quite able to get a first in their subject and a blue in their sport. And whether it's some of the major sports or half blues, we had a fencer, and we've got an Olympian postgraduate. So there's lots going on at all levels. But the senior tutor is right. We do try to keep an eye that it doesn't distract too much from the academics. Yeah, a question at the back. Oh, yes. And the Owler Club we should mention actually is yes. Yeah.
Was you concerned about taking women? So was it not a major concern amongst some of the old boys that when we took women, particularly when we went to the 77 undergraduate intake, that would affect the levels of athletic ability because they thought there wouldn't be enough men to take on for the college teams?
I could well imagine that was the case, Lizzie.
But in fact, they were seriously wrong.
Yeah, no.
No, it certainly was, and it, among certain of the fellows as well. And one of the earliest recollections of a governing body is when we wanted to put lines for netball courts down on the brand new tennis court. We had to wait until that particular fellow wasn't at a governing body.
Right, we'll take a question at the back and then we'll have time, I think, one more after that. Please.
The plans regarding the Master's Lodge sort of underneath the earth and how these plans were changed or not into reality. I wonder if there are any buildings from the early times of the 1350s and so on, if we could see them again, how they were back then. Which of these buildings would you like to reconstruct? Or are there in the history of the college buildings where the later generation said it was maybe not a good idea to demolish them and rebuild them in a different way?
I mean, my sense of the history is that not much was ever demolished. It was, refaced as front court was, or extended or refurbished, which would have perhaps involved some knocking down in the process. But the footprint per se, I do sometimes think it would be wonderful to see the hall as it was as a medieval. I don't know, Alex, what do you feel?
I feel like the hall would be the main thing that I would like to see, especially since you see from that login plan the beautiful arched windows that it had. But alas.
And the lovely through gardens. Sometimes I think that would be nice to have an orchard down the side. And then we have one last question here. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Sandra, I want to partly draw on your knowledge from your personal experience. You talked about Trinity Hall being very liberal, and I know you mean socially liberal, and that's certainly the way I've always experienced it. But I'm interested in the politics, as in the outside world, because I remember Lionel Elvin, who you will remember very well, telling me in a discussion I had about Cambridge before the Second World War that basically every undergraduate in Cambridge was either a communist or a fascist. Maybe a slight exaggeration, but this was in the context of finding in the UL a copy of Mein Kampf with a lot of marginalia from the time of the 1930s saying, yes, absolutely true here too. So I just wondered whether you've noticed any change in terms of perhaps it's not just about the nature of the politics, it's the degree of political engagement of students over the time that you've been involved with the college or looked at its life.
Well, Lionel Elvin, of course, his father was on the General Council of the TUC at the time of the General Strike. So he was one of the few undergraduates who came up through the public system and found it in some ways a very difficult environment to come into. And had he not been good at sport, he said he would have found it even more difficult. But as far as the politics, on the whole, Trinity Hall has never been very political, I think. We have got the odd MP on our books, but far more civil servants of distinction, I might add, although two of the most distinguished fell foul of the last government. But that I won't go into, perhaps. I mean, I guess if we had political interests at all, they probably ranged quite widely. But I don't get the impression or have any recollection other than, broader concerns. There was the time when we had the Winnie Mandela Boat Club, for example, as the left-wing students had a go on the JCR committee against the boat club. But those things were very domestic, really.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for great questions. And thank you for coming. And if you're interested in history, I'm sure you already know, and I hope many of you have already subscribed to the wonderful book that we've produced this year in honour of the 675th anniversary, Treasures of Trinity Hall. I don't know if we got a copy around, actually. We should have had it outside. Oh, great. Okay, because it's an absolute delight of images and pictures, but also text. In fact, all our panelists are contributors to the book, as are many other fellows and contributors from Trinity Hall. And it really does take you through the wonderful history of Trinity Hall, but through some of the objects and the buildings and the artefacts and the archives and the documents and photographs. So thank you very much. We are now going to take a 5-minute break. So I know it's a bit of a challenge, but do try and keep it to 5 minutes. Grab a water, use the loo, but then we'll come back and do part 2, which is about the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Welcome back, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Rochelle Stretch, the Development Director here at Trinity Hall, and it's wonderful to see you all here and online for our special 675th anniversary celebration with the THA. I'd like to start by thanking our panellists for our whistle-stop tour through the college's history, and just say as well that we've got our exhibition open in the Bridge Tower room that will be open until drinks at 6:45. The Masters mentioned our treasury book, which you can still pre-order, but we have our established 1350 merchandise available online and a new print that you'll see outside the dining hall that will be available shortly as well. So 675 years is quite something, and it's extraordinary to think that the college has been home to academics and researchers tackling challenging problems since 1350. But while we're taking pride in the past, we're also looking to the future. Each of us has a strong connection with Trinity Hall and knows that it's a very special place. The college brings people together and equips them to go out into the world to make a difference. And this is a legacy that we believe is worth nurturing and protecting. The theme which guides our approach to the future is believe, belong, become. And they're small words, but they represent powerful ideas. Our aims are to ensure that talented applicants believe that Trinity Hall is a place for them, whatever their background. That when students come to Trinity Hall, they belong to a community that looks after their well-being and resilience and surrounds them with the spaces they need in which to live and study. And we aim to provide students with opportunities to become a success in whatever their field. So in order to realise these ambitions, we launched our 675th anniversary campaign earlier this summer. Our vision is to attract talent and ensure that no student is prevented from attending because of financial background, to create the learning environment of tomorrow with facilities commensurate with those of other colleges, and for Trinity Hall to increase the proportion of our energy from renewable resources. But to tell you more about life at the college today and our plans for the future, I'll hand over to the Master, the Bursar and Senior Tutor. Thank you.
So I think you know us by now. I'm Mary the Master, Tim the Bursar, Michael the Senior Tutor. We've been hearing about the past, and thank you indeed to our wonderful speakers. But it is time to think about the future as well. And I'd ask you to cast your minds forward 50 years. Yes. What should Trinity Hall be then? Well, we believe it should be a place which preserves all that is very, very special that we've been hearing about and the essence of Trinity Hall, while offering exceptional facilities and education and opportunity that's appropriate for the future of learning in the 21st century. A centre of excellence and support for outstanding students at the heart of a leading research university, with modern facilities which combine with our beautiful buildings, which are greener and more sustainable. We want the very best students from all backgrounds to believe that they can thrive here. We want Trinity Hall to be a place where everyone can be confident that they truly belong, a place which will help them decide who they want to become, what career they want, how they can contribute to society and help solve the world's problems. And we're going to explore in more depth in the next 20 minutes how to achieve this, and we'll have time for questions as well and online as well. So I'm going to begin, Tim, with you, if I may, with some really a practical question, really, which is, could you give us some context on current day college finances and why it is that we need to fundraise?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mary. It is a very fundamental question. Why does Trinity Hall need to fundraise at all? And Sandra very helpfully fostered the impression of a wealthy and very well-funded institution, which I'm very grateful for, Sandra. And Cambridge, as a world-leading university, gives credence to that. But the truth is that if you put us in the company which we belong to, which is globally significant universities, we're actually much poorer than many comparable institutions. So Cambridge, the collective, the university plus all the colleges, has an endowment of a collective endowment about £10 billion. Sounds like an awful lot of money. That places us in the mid-20s globally, so nowhere near our academic positions, obviously significantly higher. It's about a quarter of the Ivy League royalty, if you like, Harvard, Yale, etc. And so we are doing more with less very, very consistently. And so that leads you on to the question, why does Cambridge and Trinity Hall in particular perform strongly? And I think the answer to that, and it's not just me, I think it is fairly clear that the answer to that is this unique mixture of a very powerful, globally significant, research-driven university dedicated to the expansion and transmission of knowledge, and then operating in much smaller communities where the level of pastoral care is extremely high, where the level of teaching is extremely individual. And that is broadly what has worked, for over 800 years. There's one problem with this model, which is that it really isn't cheap. And if you set that also against the UK funding model for higher education, what it means is that Trinity Hall broadly invests £12,000 per student per year more than it receives in fees. That invests in the education, £12,000 per student per year more than it receives in fees. That's the number for undergraduates. For postgraduates, slightly less because there's less frequent supervision. And so that means that we have an educational deficit, if you like, of well over £6 million per annum. And you'll have heard about our 675 fundraising campaign. We're not fundraising to fill that gap specifically. We're very fortunate. We do have a decent endowment. We take good care of it. And we draw from that every year. And broadly, that covers that particular deficit. But having to cover that deficit each and every year before we think of the future means that we do need to fundraise if we want to think of the future. And that's really what this campaign's about. The world is changing. We've got to change with it. And this campaign is all about investing in the future. So planning ahead to continue to deliver excellence, to make our particularly our student-facing buildings, frankly, more commensurate with the competition, actually, and more commensurate with the way that people want to learn, young people want to learn these days, and as Shell alluded to improve our sustainability.
Thank you, and we'll perhaps come back and hear a bit more about the buildings in the master plan. But Michael, could I ask you to talk a bit, about the students and what it is that you see the changes and then the sort of character of the student body and their needs now?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. So maybe I would start off by similarities, and I would say, I've been in Cambridge for just over 20 years now teaching. The students that we admit today are just as hungry as the ones a couple of decades ago, and I'm sure the ones from your time. These are students who want to learn, who want to be challenged. We heard it's very competitive now to get into Cambridge. Some courses, computer science, 10 or 15 applicants per place. So they're beating a huge amount of competition to be here. They really want to be pushed and challenged. And that's something, I think, a common thread that runs through. Where things are different, I think our students today really value a sense of community and connection in a way perhaps that previous generations didn't. And I think this is because there's so many forces pushing apart young people today. We think about social media, people spending time in isolation on their phones. What I'm finding with students who come here, they are really wanting, to join sports and societies. We heard a little bit about those. They really want to get the most out of supervision. So they love coming together to learn in a small group environment. And they like to study together. If anybody has a teenager in their life and they've been to Starbucks, you will see them all sitting there with their headphones on, sort of separately but together. And I think that sense of community is especially valued by our students. Of course, they had their education disrupted in some sense by COVID as well. So that's another force. And some of the plans that we'll hear about perhaps later have this sense of community built into them. This modern infrastructure, these modern buildings that will provide the students what they're looking for.
And the supervision system you mentioned is so powerful, so fundamental still.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, students, often when they first go to supervisions, they're like deer in headlights, and this is quite scary for them. But by the time it comes to graduation, I often see students coming to me saying, thank you for that. That completely changed my life. They're really challenged, and it forces them to come to grips and learn material in a way that you just don't get from other systems. So that's really cherished, I think.
And you said, there are real challenges for young people today. Could you say something about the degree of support for well-being or even mental health and also disability that you're looking at with the student body?
Yeah, thank you. So we see now around 25% of our students coming in, both postgraduate and undergraduates, presenting with some form of disability. And that's pretty consistent with what we see with young people across the country. I think in this university and this college in particular, we are so well set up to support students with disabilities. We've invested quite a bit in this college in a well-being team to help students adjust to studying in Cambridge. We have an excellent tutorial and pastoral support network. All of this, as Tim is well aware, is expensive, but those students are being supported to realize their potential. And I think it's so essential for what we do.
And that's physical, but also learning disabilities and mental challenges. And yeah.
Exactly.
And yes, and I think, you're right. Making sure we can continue that into the future is an important part of the campaign. So, Tim, could I come back to you and ask you to explain a bit more about our thinking and our ambitions about facilities and buildings?
Sure. So a few years ago, we commissioned a master plan to include an environmental strategy. And really, it had two overriding questions that we wanted to answer. And the first was, what does the future of learning look like, and how can we optimize our facilities for the future of learning. And the second was, how can we improve the sustainability of the college estate? And that was a really good exercise. Within the plan, there are quite a few elements which are very ambitious, very transformative. And they are needed to make sure, as I said, that we look to the future. It's not simply about maintaining this estate. It's about having an estate that's really fit for the future. And so, actually, this area, Cherry Tree Court, is due to see very significant change. Michael alluded to the way that young people like learning and headphones in Starbucks and being alone together. And our educational spaces as they stand perhaps aren't brilliantly adapted to that. And one of the things we will want to do here is have a community cafe where people can do that, but also where the whole community can come together. So staff, fellows, and students, and with a more informal dining experience, and then also a really high quality performance space above that. So that would be lecture, that would be music, that would be theatre, and that would be film, and also significantly enhanced supervision rooms as part of that. So this is an area of college where we would like to see some significant change, and that will be a real cornerstone of the master plan. We're also, and this is starting literally right now, we have planning permission, we're completely refurbishing Bishop Bateman Court. It really isn't the buildings from 1350 that give us a problem, particularly that they're a bit leaky energy-wise, and part of the sustainability strategy is significantly improving that. Actually, buildings from the 70s are really, really bad. And, Bishop Bateman Court, the roof had failed, essentially, and there were quite a few other things that simply were not working. And after we have completed this project, which I think it's going to take about a year or so to do, that will be the first fossil fuel free student accommodation that we offer. And if you set that then next to Wing Gardens, which sits right next to it, you've got that whole strip of Thompson's Lane with some, frankly, so that'll be some of the best student accommodation in Cambridge. It will be incredibly environmentally friendly, and it'll be an area we can be immensely proud of. So that's very exciting. And we're also refurbishing the properties on Bateman Street. We have quite a few properties on Bateman Street. They've been let to Pembroke for a certain time because we didn't need them. But we have got them back now. We're thrilled to have them back. It increases the number of postgraduates we can accommodate. It also serves as very helpful decant for all of the other things we got planned. And that's pretty exciting. And the way I'm thinking about these projects and this master plan is the college is going to fund quite a lot of this off its own account. So Bishop Bateman Court, we are doing that. It's going ahead. We've had the bids in from the contractors, and the junior bursar and I are just sort of filleting them, and Drs Justin sort of working out how much of the silver has to disappear to pay for that. But we will be doing that this year, and we will be paying for that off the college's account. But in order to realise this vision, it will have to be a joint venture with philanthropy to make this happen, and that's really one of the core underpinnings of this campaign. But we will do the principle here is that, frankly, we will do a lot of the unglamorous stuff. So a lot of the sustainability measures require very significant pump priming, and insulation, glazing. It's really, really, really important if you want to get the carbon footprint down. We do understand that it might not be the most visible thing, and we're here to put that infrastructure in, broadly speaking.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you. Michael, could I ask you about another element of the campaign, which is around thinking about postgraduate support? You know, we heard about how we've talked about undergraduates and the importance of funds to help us continue our support for them, but we heard how the postgraduate numbers have grown in the last years. It's such an important part of the community now, but again, not without real financial challenge.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really changed in the past few decades. So we currently have around 250 postgrads at Trinity Hall at any given time, around 370, 380 undergraduates. So as a fraction of the total student population, it's very significant indeed. And that's something that's, I think, just come about in the past few decades. It's wonderful for the college because these tend to be very high achieving, ambitious, academically able people. They come from all around the world. So about 50% of our postgraduate students are international, and they mix with the UK students as well. There's a real energy if you ever go to an MCR dinner. It's wonderful. However, unfortunately, funding for postgraduates has been under pressure from many different fronts. And some of the money that would come from research councils in the UK has just been withdrawn. Priorities are shifting elsewhere. I think the AHRC, which is the Arts and Humanities Funding Council, has cut 90% of its postgraduate funding. So this is a real, existential risk for postgraduate students here. And it's so essential for us as a university to maintain that sort of leading edge in research. Certainly, if you go into a science lab and you have no postgraduate students, you get no research done whatsoever. So that is something that we want to support. We want to be ambitious in supporting these people because we think they are the future in terms of our research output.
Yeah. So I think we hope to endow 5. Is that right?
Yeah,
5
we hope to
leadership.
permanently endow 5. We've had, thanks to generosity of, many of our alumni, we've had 40 postgraduate studentships we've been able to give out in the past 5 years. And these come from sort of fixed funds, but we're hoping to permanently endow 5, raise enough money, capital there that the interest will return in perpetuity 5 studentships.
Including one in law, probably, we hope.
One in law, yeah.
And one in subjects where women generally are underrepresented.
Correct.
Is that right? And then 3 other open. Yeah. Good. I mean, I'm now actually just going to ask you to sort of go back to the beginning, which is, the students who arrive in the first place and how we make sure that we're bringing in the best and brightest from wherever. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about our admissions and outreach and the support we need there?
Sure. So we'll go back to, how we work with 16, 17-year-olds to get them to believe that Trinity Hall is a place for them. We have added new staff to our admissions office. We've brought in somebody whose sole job it is, admissions and outreach officer, to work with schools, to work with students. She's doing a fantastic job there. We have got a lot more savvy with how we use social media. Because that is how young people learn about the world, for good or for bad. But we have a fantastic set of YouTube videos that film some of our fellows, but also many of our students, and just asking them the perspectives. What is it like to study law at Trinity Hall? And these are incredibly popular. We have over 100-something thousand views now on these videos. So they are connecting with young people and getting them to think about, Trinity Hall as a place for them. We run a number of residential events, which are, I think, particularly effective for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, where they really couldn't even imagine what a college like Trinity Hall is about. And they come here, they spend a few days, they get taught by some of our brilliant fellows and academics, and they come away with this sort of energy, but importantly, confidence. This is a place where they could see themselves. And we're starting to see some of that increased effort in access and outreach translating into applications now. And that's a trend we really want to support.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. I think I'm going to stop us now, but see whether there are any questions from the floor. Again, we've got the microphone and we'll see if anybody is online. But Tim and Michael, thank you very much indeed. Roger, question.
Yes, Tim. We've had a kind of historic context is everything. That's what I've learned today. So we've been taken back in time when law was important. The roots of Trinity Hall. We've seen on maps the growth of this small town, And when you come into the centre of Cambridge, you can still imagine the autumn mist rolling in around, and you feel rather isolated. I was at the opening of the Ray Dolby Centre, Cavendish 2, a few months ago, a £300 million building, absolutely stunning, with a huge donation from a benefactor. I've watched Cambridge spread westwards, and it's not a sleepy little town, and it's dripping with money. And I don't know how to solve this, but it seems to me, because if you talk about AHRC and you talk about the current state of public finance, everything seems incredibly tight. And yet this prosperity, it is there's not another city in the UK growing as rapidly. And it seems to me that, the one question is, one observation is, it's built on the back of colleges like Trinity Hall attracting this enormous talent. And the other observation is, or question is, how do you get some of it to rub off?
So I mean, fantastic. Thank you so much. And so I find it very inspiring, working here, and being, in some way part of that. And you're absolutely correct about the rate and the pace of innovation and building. And you're absolutely correct that the colleges and the university are essentially at the heart of that, because they're the intellectual catalyst that produces the innovation. How do you get some of it to rub off? Well, there are a number of ways. I mean, one of the things I do is take responsibility along with the investment committee for our endowment, and we have been quite, certainly relative to other colleges, I think quite innovative in terms of allocating a small part of the endowment to the fund that it's called Cambridge Innovation Capital, and it has sort of first dibs on the intellectual property in life sciences and tech coming off the university. And we were one of the first couple of colleges to invest in that. And as I said, it's a really modest part. It's a sort of 1.5% allocation from the aggregate endowment, but it's given us a great window into some of these companies, and some of them have grown, and as they've grown, they've needed more funding. And certainly in one case, we've allocated. We like the story, and we know it's not one of ours, but our engineers believe in the academic that's behind. It's quite well known in venture. So it's a semiconductor manufacturer called Pragmatic, which now has 3 production lines up in County Durham and very full order book. So we have about 1% of Pragmatic. So we're part of that, probably more so than the most of the other colleges. And we have certain alumni who are very active actually in the Cambridge innovation scene, and we are close to them, and they are very supportive of us. And I think it's a perfect example of how you get from 1350 to the future, by making sure that this college continues to be active in that scene, as a catalyst of intellectual activity, but frankly also as an investor, and also by maintaining connections and seeking philanthropy to keep it all going.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, question here, please.
A quick observation for the Bursar. When I was president of the JCR in the late 60s, I suggested it would be a nice idea if sometimes the dons could sit and eat with the undergraduates. That didn't get very far. For the Senior Tutor, delighted to hear you're reaching out through YouTube to disadvantaged people. I do hope you are also engaging with organisations such as Into University, with whom I have worked for the last 15 years, whose remit is precisely to level the playing field for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and they are very successful.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, our current, the person I mentioned we hired to do access and outreach was previously employed by a similar organization. So we have connection in that space as well. And I think into university, I've worked with them personally quite a bit. They're really well set up to start from a young age and raise aspirations, which, I think is important. And then as they get closer to university, I think that's where the college can step in and help them with that last bit.
So another initiatives like STEM Smart or You'll Fit In, or you're absolutely right to mention these schemes, which are really proving effective, and we're very engaged with. Yeah. I want Gillian, please, and then I think actually that's be our last one. Thank you. Unless, Shell, have you got any? No, fine.
Thank you. Can I ask a question about the become part? We've talked quite a lot about believing and belonging, and I guess Sandra mentioned earlier what had sort of become of I guess the cohort, the alumni over the latter half of the 20th century. You're probably less deterministic about objectives for the become, but I'd be really interested to hear how you're baking this into your thinking. What would good look like?
Do you want to have a go at that, and then I might say something as well? It's a great question. Yeah.
I mean, I think we want our students to be well-rounded, confident, and able to contribute to society. And we look at that in many different ways. So some will no offense, some will become bankers, which is probably quite good. Some will become teachers. Some will stand on the steps of DC holding up signs. But all of them are contributing in some way and building on their experience here. I hope that the education we give them prepares them well. I hope that some of our networks we can introduce them to via things like Link Hall can prepare them. I hope that some of the schemes we run over the summer, like the Laidlaw Scholars, for instance, we offer lots of funding for undergraduates to go off and do placements in the summer. So I hope those connections in the community, we can make the most of those as well.
And less formally, it's a thread of all the communications. It's a thread, certainly, even matriculation speeches I make. It's a big thread, as we go through the years and at graduation. There are some great opportunities. The Laidlaw scheme is one that supports scholarship, but in a particular context of charity/NGO leadership as well. And even, encouraging students to be part of the JCR or other roles, or the Trinity Hall summer party, social committee. All these things are ways to generate a sense of how they can contribute in different ways. I find it very striking. Some students come with a very clear idea of what they want to do. Some are scooped up so efficiently and effectively, often depending what kind of subject they're doing, through all sorts of commercial but also educational opportunities that target them, and but some don't know what they want to do. And certainly in the arts and humanities, it feels a less certain world for them. So again, not formally, but we have quite a lot of conversations trying to help them think that through and not lose their nerve about their own particular interests, ambitions, but always a sense of, in a way, you've been given a great opportunity here. It's also an opportunity to make something of that and give something back. And generally, I think many of them have that spirit, actually. They do. Yeah. But it's a great question, Gillian. Yeah. Sorry, as you can see, at the end of a long week. Thank you very much indeed. I would also like to just say great thanks to the THA, because, of course, you are so important to creating the spirit of support that we've talked about. Yes, we're looking to the future, and it's been a really great opportunity to do that in collaboration, Guy, and with the THA today and for the dinner ahead. So thank you very much indeed. I hope we've given you a sense of the exciting possibilities for the future. I just would come back to what I think in the end we all feel very, very strongly, which is the power of a college, and the power of Trinity Hall in particular, is this human scale community of people, which gives our young people, our PhDs, and indeed our fellows, a wonderful sort of ground on which to stand in a pretty turbulent world. So thank you very much indeed, and look forward to seeing you all at dinner later on. Back to you, Tin and Michael.